It is a beautiful day out today, and what better day to talk about the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as an Uber driver and as a Lyft driver. And this is something you might not expect. I've talked about this before in other videos. However, I kind of want to do its own singular video about this because I get so many comments all the time on this channel and all the prior videos I've done about Lyft and Uber. I've been doing Lyft and Uber videos since like 2015 or 16. I was one of the first big Lyft and Uber YouTubers, period, and I took some of those videos down, decided to make this one channel just about Lyft and Uber, and throughout the years, it was so interesting seeing the YouTube comments and the crazy comment wars that happen on YouTube, and people would be like, hey Mark, I make so much money driving for Lyft and Uber, I quit my job. That's awesome. But then you'd see other comments on that same comment being like, dude, you definitely work for Lyft and Uber, that's BS. I don't make anything driving for Lyft and Uber. And here's what's interesting is they're actually both right, because the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as an Uber driver and as a Lyft driver is your location. And I know that sounds kind of weird. You're like, well, what do you mean? Well, there's a few different factors that determine how much money you can make driving for Lyft and Uber, depending on when you drive, if you drive during the peak hours and not peak hours. There's a lot of different factors. However, given all things considered, if you live in a bad area to drive for Lyft and Uber, it doesn't really matter. You could be the smartest driver in the world, but if you're in a place like Florida or Ohio, for example, you're not gonna make as much, just given the demographics, the rates, all these different factors, as someone who maybe lives in San Francisco or New York, or I used to drive back in Boston. Here's a survey that Rideshare did, and they did this a few years ago. They do this almost every year, but this just shows the average hourly rate based off that area. Meaning, if you're in a bad area to drive for Lyft and Uber, even if you're like, look, Mark, I'm gonna go all in, I'm gonna drive only during, the peak hours, morning and evening commutes, Friday and Saturday night, so on and so forth. Even if you do all that, you're not gonna make as much money as somebody who, like I said, lives in like New York or San Francisco or another place that, just given everything considered, has a higher hourly rate. Another factor determining how much money you can make in terms of Lyft and Uber, in terms of your location, is also employee versus independent contractor status. This is a big one. So for example, here in California, they passed Prop 22, and it was a big debate, should Lyft and Uber drivers, this is true for every state, but should Lyft and Uber drivers be independent contractors or employees? They're now staying as independent contractors, at least at the time of this video. It could change in the future. However, one of the clauses of Prop 22 is that Lyft and Uber drivers now have a minimum hourly guarantee. Now, when I was driving for Lyft and Uber, there was none of that. That means that there would be some days, I'm not gonna lie, I would drive in a bad time, I'd do maybe one ride, and when you do all the math out in terms of depreciation on my car, taxes, etc., I might make literally only $3 to $4 in that hour. And I'd be like, wow, I'd much rather stay home, make YouTube videos or make music than just drive and make $3 to $4 an hour. However, if you were to do that here in California, even if you only made $3 or $4 in that hour, guess what? Uber and Lyft would still bump you up to make sure you're still getting that minimum hourly guarantee. Now, some states have this, a lot of states don't. And granted, this is still changing as time goes on. The whole big debate of Uber and Lyft drivers becoming independent contractors or employees is changing a lot, and it could go to a federal level. But at least at the time of this video, it's a state-by-state level, and that is something to really factor into. So that's why I want to say in this video that there's really two factors that determine how much money you can make, but they're all based around your location. One, of course, just the general demographic of your area. It kind of stinks to say that if you, like, say you really want to go all on Lyft and Uber, but you live in just a bad area, it's kind of unfortunate, right? And two is your state rules about the whole independent contractor versus employee debate. And of course, if there's any extra rules on top of that, like I said with California, now there's minimum hourly guarantees. But of course, remember, regardless of where you live, if actually you really want to drive for Lyft or drive for Uber, remember the biggest thing is driving smart, which is why in all these videos that I like to do, I like to give you a lot of pro tips. I have an entire pro tip series of 120 pro tips for Uber driver tips and Lyft driver tips for the Uber driver and Lyft driver. Definitely check that video out. But unfortunately, and I have to be honest in this video, and this is why I see so many comment wars, and it's really interesting seeing the polar opposites of some people being like, I love Lyft and Uber, I make insane money, or I hate Lyft and Uber, I make pretty much nothing. When you do the meta-analysis, when you look at, okay, well, where does each person live, you find out the person makes a lot of money, just lives in a great area to drive for Lyft and Uber, and the person who, like, say, is complaining about Lyft and Uber and doesn't make that much money, unfortunately lives in a really bad area.